Hi everyone, welcome back to TaraChessAcademy. Today, for International Chess Day, we're going to look at a very interesting game here. And let's start. White played d4, black played knight f6, c4, e6. So this is the Nimzo-Indian defense with bishop b4. Black's intending to double white's pawn by just capturing the knight on c3. So white plays queen c2. So this is all very common, just guarding the knight and stopping the pawns from being doubled. But a disadvantage of this is that the queen gets out to c3 and can be attacked very often with some tempo. So usually there's c5, d5, and castles as the main moves. So here black just plays d5 and we have a3, bishop takes c3, queen takes c3, knight e4. So now queen c2, and here knight c6 is played. So this is the older variation, but currently the most popular variation is just c5 and then knight c6, so that when we have this position here, we'll see how white plays it very nicely. And after this game, pretty much not many games were played in this line, but this was a popular line. And knight c6 is played, attacking d4. Now after white goes e3, the idea is to go e5. So this does open up the position, but it seems like there's a problem because white can just go c takes d5, queen takes d5, and bishop c4, attacking the queen, and it seems like winning the knight. But after black gives this check, queen a5 check, we can see the point is that if there's a move like b4, attacking the queen and the knight, now knight takes b4 takes advantage of the pin because the rook on a1 is undefended here. So white can't capture the knight. So here white plays queen takes e4, black plays knight c2 check, and this is a double check. So the queen and the knight are giving a check, and here the king goes to e2, and this is the most natural square for the king. Now here black plays queen e1, so this is just an important move to play before knight takes a1, because here knight f3 would be really strong with the lead in development that white has. And you can see that even though white's king is in the center, black's king is actually in more danger with the lead in development that white has. So that continues to be a theme. But queen e1 is played. Now this just pins the knight on g1 to the rook, and now knight takes a1. So here black is up 3, so the rook and the pawn in exchange for the bishop. That creates this really imbalanced position. So now it seems like queen e5 check would be the most natural move, but actually black can give up a little bit of material to quickly castle and then have threats on the bishop on c1 and even just taking the bishop back. So here black would be fine, and it's not a good idea for white to take this. So instead, white plays bishop b2, aiming at the long diagonal. And now black castles. And here white plays king to g3. So this is a really interesting move. It just gives some space for the knight, and the idea is to sacrifice the rook and then come in and attack the h7 pawn, looking for the checkmate. So that's the idea, and that's what was played up to this point. So king g3. So this is all still theory. Now king h8 was the move that was popular at the time, but the other moves are like bishop d7. But then knight f3 would come, and then we would get into this position where black is actually up 8 pawns, but they have this resource to escape from this pressure that white has with rook takes e3 check, and black just can get a perpetual, it seems, but actually just bishop e2, and after a move like bishop g4, white would go king f4, and there'd be no perpetual, and there would be a checkmate coming up with d5, and the queen would just aim at these dark squares here. So there was a game that did go like this and went into a perpetual, but here white could have played bishop e2 to just win the game. So that move's not working, and then the only other move is really h6. So you can see these are all games that were played after this game. So this game was played in 1997, and h6 wasn't really explored at the time. So king h8, and there was a game which went knight f3, queen takes h1, and knight g5, creating the checkmate threat. Now black stopped it by playing f5, and we had queen takes e5, bishop d7, and we got to this really complicated position in these games. So here it seemed like black was better, but it was very complicated with white's attack and black's attack here. So it was a very complicated position. But instead, white's improvement here is to play d takes e5. Now, this is just slowing down by one move, and now you have the pressure along the diagonal here. So the idea is that you have bishop d3 threatening checkmate, and then let's say just black plays a random move, bishop d3 threatens checkmate. Now g6 is the best move. Here if f5, then en passant, and queen takes h7, checkmate would be coming up soon. So bishop e6 was actually a better move, but bishop d7, bishop d3, we're just looking at the line here, g6 and e6 opening up the bishop, and now after f6, white could even take the pawn, take the bishop, or play e7, and the pawn is really close to queening, and bishop e6 stops this e pawn from moving, but now white plays the rook sacrifice idea, and white has sacrificed both of their rooks and is now threatening this checkmate. And all of these moves for black are forced. Here also, if f5, it's the same response. Now g6 is played, and now it seems like black doesn't really have many problems, but if there's like a move like queen h4, black can just escape with king g8, and then there's no more attack really, and black would be up a lot of material. So you can pause the video and try to figure out what the move white played was. So here in this position, white played knight takes f7, and black played rook takes f7, but first we'll look at some other moves. If bishop f7, then e6, king g8, and queen e5. This is just a checkmating threat. And king g8, then even the bishop could just be captured, or just the knight could go back to g5 even, and we could get some line like this where we have the rook blocking the check, and white doesn't even take it but goes e6, and then basically just has this checkmate like king g8. This would be a checkmate. So rook takes f7 is forced. So now bishop takes e6. And now rook g7 was played. But this was the only time that black had another move from move 17 onwards after d takes e5. All of these moves are forced. But here, black actually has the choice to sacrifice the rook here. So this doesn't work out, but it's an interesting attempt for counterplay. But king takes f2, rook f8, king g3. Now it's just like some queen e1, king h3, or if king g7, there's this move bishop d7, which opens up the square for the e pawn. So now the a1 to h8 diagonal can be opened, and then it would just lead to a quick checkmate here. And rook takes f2 doesn't really work for that reason. So rook g7 instead. So now white plays bishop to f7. And now after rook takes f7, goes e6, giving the check. And now threatening queen h8 mate. And now after king takes f7, white played queen to d7, and black resigned because after a move like king f8, which is the only move, queen to g7 and bishop f6 creates the checkmating threat, which can't be stopped here. So we can look at the game and see if there is a more accurate way of playing. So now let's look at the computer analysis. And here we have c takes d5 and bishop c4. So here it thinks that it's a bit better for black, but white does have their own counterplay, with the development lead that they have. While throughout the game we can see that the queen is just sort of scattered. The queen and the knight are just scattered, and white has a much better development and plays very accurately. And this was actually a novelty at the time, and just creating the threat of knight f3, knight g5, and even adding the bishop to the attack was even more powerful. So bishop e6, we had knight f3, sacrificing the other rook. So at this point, white is actually down 7 and sacrifices the knight on f7. Well, it's really more of a trade, but now after rook to d7, bishop to f7, and now he comes whether black takes it or not. So another move could have been queen to d1 with the idea of going queen to d6 check, but after move 5, then it would just be very good for white. Also just f4 could be played too. So throughout the game we could really see how white was playing this in an aggressive manner, with the king coming to g3, sacrificing both rooks, developing, creating all of these threats. And at the time this was a perfectly playable line, but because of this novelty of d takes e5, white won the game here. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.